You're ready, Judge.
Okay, well, good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. I am really honored that we have our guest today. Her name is Carole Lieberman, and she's a medical doctor and is also a diplomat of the Association of Psychiatrists and Neurologists. And so, without further ado, and I must tell you, I am extraordinarily impressed with your CV. I actually read all about you. So tell us a little bit about where you come from, what do you do, and what have you been doing?
My whole life story. Well, I come from New York City, and I have always wanted to be a psychiatrist. I mean, actually, when I was a little girl, I decided I wanted to be a doctor after reading about Elizabeth Blackwell, the first woman doctor in America. And then when I was a teenager, I read Freud's um, introduction to dreams, analysis of dreams. And that's when I decided I wanted to be a psychiatrist. I totally connected with it right away. And then, then I went to school, I went to college, went to medical school in Belgium, in French. And then I came back and I did a year of two and a half years of like sub internships, rotating through various medical specialties. And then I knew I wanted to be a psychiatrist, but I did that to have a good background. And then I did 3 years of a psychiatric residency at NYU Bellevue. And that was like the best place in the world. I had read a book, Bellevue is My Home, and it was all about a doctor who worked there and talked about how Bellevue is the place for people who have a lot of aren't afraid of what could walk through the door. And it just seemed like a very exciting and very interesting place, and that's where I wanted to do my residency, and it happened. And since then, what also in my last year there, I was chief resident, and uh, I went for several months to England, to London, and studied under Anna Freud at her Hampstead clinic. So, by the time I finished my residency, to make a long story short, I felt like I was ready to retire. I mean, I had kind of seen it all. And but then I came out to California because I wanted to, it had always also been my plan to not just see patients in my office, but to be more of a figure, to have to help more people, to get information out, to help people with their lives, but on a larger score. In other words, using the media to television and radio and print and all kinds of media to get, because I felt like I had been so fortunate to have such an incredible education that I wanted to share what I learned. And so I was doing that, and then 9/11 happened. And even though by then, I was trying to say why I moved to California, because I wanted to work in the media. And at that time, that was more here. And I also wanted, one of my pet peeves was violence in the media. I was the head of the National Coalition on TV Violence. And so I wanted to do work on that. I did protests at movie studios that were showing violent movies, and I did. One of the things I'm most proud of was there was a rocket. Well, NASA had a rocket that they were going to be sending up. This was in 1993, and it was the first rocket that was going to have some private experiments on it, and partially funded privately. And they, besides companies putting things on the rocket, to do various experiments, they also and which they paid for, of course, they also wanted to make money with the outside of the rocket. And so they had an auction, and Columbia bought it, and they were going to advertise Schwarzenegger's Last Action Hero. And I I remember waking up one morning and reading this in the LA Times, and I thought, what? Is this a joke? Because it just was so outrageous to me. First of all, that they would have an ad on the outside of a NASA rocket. That was pretty tacky. But second of all, that it would be for Schwarzenegger's violent movie, which I had protested many times already. Not that one, but the ones before. It was Last Action Hero, but his new one. And so I did for months. It took me about 3 or 4 months to do a campaign, media campaign, a personal campaign. I mean, I appeared at various places, and my message was, I gave out 4 different places that people should contact if they also were horrified at this possibility. It was the president, it was Columbia and Sony Studios, it was Schwarzenegger's publicist, and it was NASA's line, like an 800 line to report waste. So anyhow, enough people heard my message that they did call and fax and so on. And so in the end, at the last minute, actually, I did press conferences at the last minute. They canceled the whole rocket because they said they got so many complaints about it that the people pulled out. The private industry people didn't want to be associated with it. I wasn't really trying to stop the rocket, but if it had to be, in order to stop the ad, then it had to be. And then what? I was starting to say about 9/11, that, of course, terrorism, and that's when I decided that this was going to be the most important issue in our lifetime, which it is, clearly. Which it still is. I mean, even though a lot of people want to forget about terrorism. But anyhow, and so I became the terrorist therapist, meaning, I named myself, and I have been helping people since 9/11 in America, in London, in Manchester, in Paris, and now in Israel, helping them cope with terrorism and helping them wake up to the fact that, terrorists are not done. They want to wipe all the unbelievers, as they consider us, off the map. So, and I wrote 2 books on terrorism. I was already writing books about relationships and so on. But anyway, and I do a podcast now on terrorism, the Terrorist Therapist Show. And I really think that that's very important and is going to be more important as terrorists finally come out and do more attacks.
That's an interesting subject which we are going to talk about. Tell us about the publications that you've written.
Well, the other 2 books were, my first book was Bad Boys, Why We Love Them, How to Live with Them, and When to Leave Them. And that came out right when Clinton was being a bad boy with Monica Lewinsky. So it was kind of timely. I mean, I did not know that was going to happen when the book came out. But, and the other relationship book I wrote was Bad Girls, Why Men Love Them and How Good Girls Can Learn Their Secrets. And besides that, I've done, the gamut. I wrote an article that was in the in the Encyclopedia Britannica about compulsive shopping. And what else? I have journal articles that I've written, notably about schizophrenia, kind of a lot of different topics that, because, the thing is that I started out in New York, then went to Belgium, then went back to New York, then went to California. And so I've seen mental health systems in a lot of different places. And then, of course, London as well. When I was in London, besides learning from Anna Freud, I did research at the Maudsley Hospital in schizophrenia. So, I've seen a lot of different healthcare systems, mental health care systems in particular. And so, I just, and then also I left out currently also, as well as seeing patients, I'm a forensic psychiatrist. And in other words, I testify what a forensic psychiatrist is, but for your listeners and watchers, I'm an expert witness for criminal and civil cases. One of the cases that I'm sure you would know, would remember, one of my favorite cases was I was the defense psychiatrist for Jonathan Schmitz in the Jenny Jones talk show murder.
I also noted from your CV that you've been recognized by the Academy and have been considered for a number of Emmys.
Yes, I've been three-time Emmy honored. Yes.
Well, that's terrific recognition. You and I have a lot in common, other than I'm originally from New York. When I worked at the studios, I was head of business affairs for Warner Brothers.
Oh, well.
And
then you do know about Jenny Jones.
I know a lot because you're a member of SAG and the Writers Guild. And I was the negotiator for collective bargaining agreements with those unions and guilds, and I became a trustee on their pension plans.
Oh, wow.
SAG and Writers Guild, et cetera, and then end up, when I left the studio, representing a couple of the unions. So I have a good sense, and I can relate somewhat to some of the things that you've been doing. I know that so much of what you know, we could talk for hours, I'm sure, but we're not going to do that.
Okay, were you at Warner Brothers in the mid-90s when the Jenny Jones murder happened?
Well, I was there in the 60s.
Okay, you're lucky.
Well, actually, I ended up representing a lot of celebrities, as you have. And there's great stories I could tell, but I can't name the people. You know? But I can understand some of the psychological things that I experienced, and I'm sure that's what you experienced as well. But I want to talk about some things that really are current.
Yes.
First is hate and division. I think we're seeing now more, at least overtly, more hate and division than we saw before. Well, of course, we've had it throughout history. People hate for reasons that you could, I'm sure, explain, mainly ego-related kinds of I want and you got, and I want what you got. And that's certainly one of the elements of hate programs like anti-Semitism, the same kind of thing. The bottom line is, tell us what your observations are as to what the country is thinking now and what your view is about the hate and division that is now becoming much more obvious as well as being overt.
Well, yes, this is a major, major problem. Before the election, it was understandable. I mean, everybody would talk about how divided the country was, and it was. And one would have hoped that after the election, the people who didn't vote for Trump, would sort of give up trying to destroy him. And that really isn't the case. There is so much. It is irrational. My definition for Trump derangement syndrome is an irrational, quasi-psychotic hatred of anything Trump, resulting in rage and over-the-top efforts to destroy him and his work. And I've been talking about Trump derangement syndrome for many years, but it has gotten worse. And the best example of that, of how much worse it's gotten, is when he was giving his speech to Congress. The fact that he was saying all these amazing things that we should be so happy and grateful for, and have so much hope, that this is going to be another renaissance of America, a new renaissance, taking us out of the doldrums. And instead of that, half the room, you could just see it. It was down the middle. Half the room was clapping and all that. And the other half, they were either just stone-faced, or they were carrying placards, or, in one, Al Green, made a ruckus. But it's like, it was just so infuriating because these people, who are so angry and who are taking steps. It's not just that they don't like Trump and they're not clapping. They're taking all kinds of steps to try to stop the progress that he's making, from lawfare to just all different, judges making rulings and but other ways too, every which way that they can try to stop these great plans that he has and his executive orders that he signed. I was at the inauguration, by the way. I was there in the Capital One arena when he was signing the first part, the first executive orders, and of course he's signed a lot more. So the idea that they would take it from just not liking him, not liking his personality, to actually continuing to stop what he's trying to do is just, I mean, that's against America. It's not just against him, it's against America. And that is just shameful. It's just shocking and shameful.
Well, I thought what was significant was that one little spot where the little kid got the honorary badge and the response that you got from one side of the aisle versus the other. And I'm not a Democrat and I'm not a Republican. I'm pretty much an independent. But I was offended by the fact that they couldn't show the dignity and the fear, the feelings that this little kid deserved recognition. He's not political. He's not anything.
Yes.
To react as they did, I thought was very, very disrespectful. And it kind of significantly pointed to me what they're doing with a lot of other things. And so the next question is, what do you think the mood of the country is right now?
It's mixed. There are people, including myself, who are optimistic, who are excited, who, love. I mean, I'm kind of like that. I love the way he's just not doing things half. I don't know. You're allowed to say half. Are you allowed to say assed on your podcast?
He's not anything you want.
He's not doing things half-assed. He knows. I mean, it's not like he came up with these ideas after he was elected. He's been planning this for a very long time, and he's trying to get things done very quickly. Even when there are these things that are stopping him, that are delaying him in certain areas. He's certainly not giving up, and I really admire that. And he knows that what he's doing is right for the country, and he's going to do it no matter what happens. Although I am a bit concerned that there are people out there, I believe, who are still planning to assassinate him. They haven't given up. Now, on the positive side with that, and I think that's I think consciously or unconsciously, that's part of why he is, moving ahead so quickly, that he wants to get a lot done before they can kill him. Now, that might be unconscious, and it worries me when he doesn't seem to be careful enough like he's out in public, he's literally out in, and I mean, I know that there are Secret Service around and so on, dressed not as Secret Service. But I just hope he's very careful, because I think there are a lot more. Now, of course, Obama, Biden, those people want to blame it on Iran. And yeah, sure, maybe Iran has some assassins in America, but there's more than Iran. And that worries me. But anyhow, people are seeing, though, more and more, and this is really good, that J.D. Vance is really quite powerful himself. He's very, he also believes in common sense. And, we've seen examples of that with Zelensky, for example. What he said in the office was very, was very plain. Like, he has this way of speaking that's just very plain. And I mean, not in a bad way. It's very clear. And so people saw that, everybody was watching that. And also when he was in Europe and he was talking about AI, and he was talking about, that Europe has to kind of depend upon themselves too, not just depend upon America. I mean, the speeches that he's been making, people can see that even if, God forbid, they were to assassinate Trump, that he's right there. He's not as powerful. He's not as he doesn't have as commanding a presence as Trump, and he's not as experienced as Trump, but he certainly believes in the same things, and he would certainly continue to have them done.
Well, he's certainly articulate, and he makes a lot of sense. He speaks in terms that the public can understand, because we have a division in our public. There are the haves and there's the have-nots, and there's some group in between. Why do you think the election went the way it did?
Why? Because God saved him, and God saved the election. It was a miracle, really. Because, and there were, it didn't really get a lot of attention. I mean, they didn't talk about it a lot, certainly not in the mainstream media, but there were attempts to sabotage this election too, to falsify it also. It's not like nothing happened that was bad, but it was too big to rig. And I think that was a miracle, because when Biden, when he ran against Biden the first time, first of all, I've been doing media talking about, from the first time that he ran, talking about why people talking about why people should vote for Trump, but also talking about warning people about Biden. As an expert witness, of course, I do a lot of cases of where people competency, like with wills and so on. And so I know, I'm very attuned to seeing that. And so when Biden was in his basement, I could tell right then. I called it encroaching dementia. Like, it wasn't clear, it wasn't there 100%, but it was encroaching. And I did so much media talking to people, warning people, hello, wake up. This is encroaching dementia. Do you want a president with a dementia? And, we know how that election went. But I think people weren't, even back then, people weren't voting for Biden. They were voting against Trump. The people who didn't like Trump would have voted for a parakeet if the Democrats had put one up. So there was never this love of Biden, and there certainly wasn't a love of Kamala. But I was worried that the same people who voted for Biden in order to not vote for Trump would vote for Kamala. But then she even got some of them, to realize what a disaster that would be.
Well, it's interesting, this whole woke program and DEI and things of that nature are really up front right now. And do you think that the public has kind of responded negatively to these DEI programs and things of that nature because it's affecting the rest of us?
Well, now there is a turnaround. Like some stores are not doing DEI and not not catering to that. I was pretty shocked. One of the most shocking things about wokeness, which is pretty horrible, and I hated the way they took away what was his name, the children's author, who, one of my favorite children's authors. Do you remember? I'm blocking on his name, but anyway, where they tried to get his books taken off the shelves. Hopefully I'll remember it before we're done. But anyhow, you know who I'm talking about. Who? I'm sorry.
With the Dr. Seuss?
Dr. Seuss. There we go. Yes, Dr. Seuss. I mean, and Monopoly. They tried to get rid of Monopoly also. These were crazy things. But the thing that bothered me the most was when the American Medical Association and the American Psychiatric Association bought into wokeness. The American Medical Association, they know when children are born, they only come with male parts or female parts. Now, there is a small percentage, very, very small, of people with special kinds of genetic defects where you can have variations. But we're talking about, like 1% or something like that. And that's not what wokeness, that's not what they're talking about. So for the American Medical Association to start, to do all of this pronoun stuff, and even the American Psychiatric Association, and the American Psychological Association. I mean, if they're not going to be use common sense, who's going to use common sense? I mean, this is just crazy. And I'm so glad, although there's blowback on this too, pushback on this too, but Trump, by saying that he didn't want to have any federal money going to hospitals and programs that transition the kids. I mean, it is child abuse. There is no way that a child or a person less than 18 years old can make decisions about what gender they think they are, and they want to be for the rest of their life. And especially the parents. It is also shocking that parents are going along with it. And really, this little dirty secret with that is that when a parent, let's say, has a boy and he tries on his mother's high heels, and the mother quickly brings him to a doctor for hormones or something, really it has to do with them unconsciously having wanted to have a child who was a girl or whatever, the opposite sex. The parents encourage this when really they wanted a child of the opposite sex. And then they try to say that it's the child who knows that, they are. Now there is, in some children, it is authentic, and it has to do with the hormones in a mother's body when the child is growing in the uterus, and it also has to do with the first childhood years, the psychodynamics, the relationship that the child has with their mother and with their father. So there are some people who are authentically transgender, but they don't need to have. That is not the majority. That's also a very tiny percentage compared to the number who have been talked into this to get attention, to get, to get their parents attention, to get social media attention, to get their teachers' attention, their classmates' attention, all the wrong reasons. And kids were particularly vulnerable to this when they got out of COVID, when during the time that they were out of school and they weren't developing properly the way they're supposed to for whatever age they were. And so they were unhappy, and they were, and so it seemed like the grass was greener, and that's what their teachers were telling them. Oh, I know what's wrong with you. And it's also the doctors and the psychiatrists and the psychologists, I know some detransitioners are suing them, but we need to have more, because that is one of the only ways that people are not going to continue. Like if the detransitioners make more of a presence, if more people realize why they're trying to detransition and how this was an awful mistake, then that would help the people who, are thinking about it, but haven't really done it yet, or are in the midst of it. Maybe they got hormones, but they didn't get surgery. Detransitioners, I think, are our best weapon against kids continuing to go down this path.
Well, what's interesting is I noted that in recent efforts to somewhat control the situation, the Democrats have voted against any of the changes that government is offering to make in terms of college or even professional athletics.
Yes.
And they're men that are competing in women's sports. And that's, to me personally, doesn't sound very fair. But yet the Democrats are still holding on to this transgender equality and allowing this to happen. And the Republicans seem to be opposing it on what seem to be reasonable grounds.
Yes.
Is that an indication to you that the left, the far left, the woke people are not giving up?
Yes. I mean, that just happened fairly recently, that the bill came before Congress, and the Democrats voted against, the bill was to not provide federal funds for schools where they allow transgender males to, or like, females, whatever they want to call themselves at the time, to play against real women, biological women in sports. I mean, that was kind of a no-brainer. Like, certainly some of these people who voted against it have daughters or granddaughters who are going to be impacted by this if they haven't been already. So certainly their constituencies are going to be impacted. So how do they have the nerve to vote against it? I mean, it's just awful. It's just TDS, Trump derangement syndrome.
By the way, what do you think of these DEI and similar type programs?
I think they're awful. I think that a lot of people, I think it's part of the reason why we have the air traffic controller mess, because there were people who took the test who scored very well, but they were white males. And so they didn't get picked. And then people who fit under the DEI criteria were picked who didn't necessarily have as good scores on the tests. So we see that this is life-threatening. I think it should always be people who are the most qualified, who work the hardest, to be the most qualified, who study the hardest, for example. There was a thing I read maybe a year ago about medical schools, that they were no longer using the medical boards or the MedCats to pick people, or even grades. What they were putting more emphasis on was if you did social justice volunteer work. Hello? Social justice volunteer work. That's going to make you a good doctor, right? A better doctor. And then they're spending lots of time in their curricula to teach DEI subjects instead of teaching medicine. So much is going down the wrong track. And hopefully we will be able to fix it in these 4 years.
Well, without going into too much speculation, and that's a legal term that we use, what do you think the future of the Democratic Party looks like as they stand today?
Well, there are reports that they're falling apart. Certainly they are in disarray. But remember when Kamala made a speech, her concession speech, finally, not that night, but finally she conceded. She had a talk with people in her party to make sure they couldn't still overturn the election. So she wanted to wait a few days. But something that really kind of stuck out to me that was worrisome was she mentioned, I think it was 20, I counted it in a transcript. She used the word fight 20 some odd times about how, like, her supporters need to keep fighting. And, that was sort of interspersed with other things she was saying. And of course, she was taking off on Trump's fight. But it was more than that. It seemed to me that it was a dog whistle to people in the Democratic Party that they should not give up, that we need to fight harder to get our ideals, the ideals that she stood for, whatever they were, never really got to know what they were, to make them happen. And I think that is what's happening, that is part of, why things are being stopped and all that. They are trying their best. I don't think they're going to win. I think in the end, Trump is going to win, even if things go up to the Supreme Court. But so I don't think they're going down without a fight, but they are in disarray. It would be, it would be nice if somebody, if there came to be someone with good ideas, who was a Democrat, who was a leader, who would run for president the next election. I'm not, we need more good leaders, and we need people with good ideas. So I certainly don't want the Democratic Party to die altogether. But if they're going to be doing things like voting against this bill in regard to trans people playing against girls, maybe they do need to totally go.
Well, it's kind of interesting. I've been watching both sides, and you can, of course, distinguish the difference very easily. And as a judge, I always had to listen to both sides.
Mhm.
And there are criteria that we use, which of course you know as a forensic expert, that are rules of law, one of which deals with credibility, bias, motive, interest, and the rest. But it
Right.
seems we've gotten away from that criteria because I watched one show, the Democratic side, and they went on and on and on. And then I watched the Republican, actually on Newsmax, because I've been on Greg Kelly's show a number of times. And it's entirely different in terms of approach, and yet the facts are actually the same. It's
Uh-huh.
amazing. People refer to it as the spin, of course, but the reality is, even in the courtroom, one lawyer is saying whatever they're saying, and oftentimes I would say to myself, "That sounds pretty reasonable, pretty logical." In the opening statement from one party, so that's you know what? But I was sworn to and did adhere to listening to the other side. And then I
Mhm.
would hear the other side's statement, whether it was a criminal case or a civil case. And I said, you know what, that sounds pretty good. You
Uh-huh.
know? And there I was having to follow what's the basic cardinal rule, which is called the burden of proof. And
Right.
you have criteria to use. But it's obvious now that we don't seem to be on the same page on almost anything. When I say we, I'm talking about the public's response to what we're hearing from the various people. And of course, there's always the fear of the unknown. And I suppose
Yeah.
right now, many people are feeling unknown because of the dramatic changes versus what we had previously, the 50s. I grew up in the 50s and I love those days. I mean,
Mhm.
so uncomplicated. And even though everybody loves this AI and computers for everything, I'm not so sure I love it.
I
I'm kind of
know. I
I'm kind of
know.
like a dinosaur. I put things in writing and I talk to people on the phone. If you try to call places, all you know is you hear a machine and there's nobody to talk to. And
Yes,
that's
yes.
where it's going. So now we're seeing the unknown, and it really is unknown. And I heard yesterday the polls, and polls are not always right. In fact, they're wrong a lot of the time. And I said
Yeah.
to myself, on one station, they said,
Huh.
"Oh, Trump is doing so badly. His credibility and his
Uh-huh.
acceptability rate is dropping." And then you watch Newsmax, and they talk about how everybody loved it. 70 some odd percent loved the speech. I mean,
Uh-huh.
we're presented with two options, and it's all about who's spinning it. And I guess what it comes down to, Trump is a no nonsense guy. He says
Yes.
he says what he says. Whether you like him or you don't, or you like his attitudes or his conduct, makes no difference because if you look at it analytically, it's what he stands for. And
Exactly.
whatever they're going to be made, that's the only thing that matters. Whether you like him or not makes no difference whatsoever. In fact, I kind of look at the appointments, and I interviewed Bobby Kennedy on my
Uh,
radio show, and I've had a lot of the experts from Washington and whatever. And
mhm.
the reality is, he says it the way it is, whether you like it or you don't, and he doesn't care what people think of him. And I think that's a terrific quality for a leader because they're
Absolutely.
leading something as opposed to just talking in vague ambiguities. And
Yes.
I kind of like the whole thing with Musk. They were talking about for years and years about cleaning out the swamp. I know I worked for the government when I first started my career.
Oh, yeah.
There is an enormous amount of bloat and waste and frivolity that goes along with it, but it keeps on going. This is the first time I think anybody really did try to clean out the swamp. Now I'm not naive. If you think it's only one party versus the other, that ain't so. They both do it.
Uh-huh.
It goes back to the beginning, and it's not only corruption in our government; it's corruption in probably every government. And a lot of people were making money. I keep asking myself the question: how did Nancy Pelosi, who had a $223,000 salary, get to be worth $130 million? How did Barack Obama? Same kind of thing. These people get elected. They have one motive: it's to get reelected.
Mhm.
They will do whatever they need to do. And so I'm kind of interested in what's going on now with the negotiations over Ukraine and the Middle East. We're making more progress now in 45 days than we made in 4 years.
Yes,
People are
absolutely.
talking, somebody, that Trump is a favorite. He likes Putin and all these oligarchs. Well, you know what? That's not really what the bottom line is. The bottom line is called diplomacy. And
Mhm.
you do a whole lot better in negotiating. Well, I was trained as a mediator. And the object is to have a better feeling about the other side as opposed to being hostile and angry.
Yes.
Hostility and anger got nowhere. And what historically it has shown is that you only win by strength. You don't win by conceding, as Chamberlain did in the late 1930s in Munich. And the reality is, you may not like what he's doing, but it looks like the results are coming the way they should be. And
Yeah.
Musk really not, he don't need the money.
Uh-huh.
So he's not going to worry about taking a bribe.
Right.
I think with Bobby Kennedy, by the way, with whom I had a very nice conversation before we did a show,
Uh-huh.
he was right. I read his book. He was absolutely right about Fauci.
Uh-huh.
They made it look like a pariah when all he was doing was telling it like it was. And I read his book and I checked the notations in his book,
Uh-huh.
citations,
Yeah.
and he had evidence to support. And it's now coming out that he was right. So,
I during COVID, I had a website called pleasefirefauci.com. And I had all the reasons why we should fire Fauci. And I ran sort of a public health campaign, because I have a degree in public health as well, as you mentioned, I think. And one of the first things I learned in studying for my master's in public health was you don't, if there's some kind of a health condition, a big health condition, you don't scare the public. That's not how you get them to do things that will work to get rid of this health concern. And that was all that Fauci was doing. Every day we were inundated with reports, television, radio, print, all the people who were dying. Oh, you're going to die if you don't get this vaccine, all this kind of stuff. And that was not helpful, to say the least, not to mention even the dangers of the vaccine. I haven't been vaccinated. I didn't let my daughter get vaccinated. But so what I did was I created what did I call it? I created like a list. Heal Myself was the acronym, and each letter stood for something that you should be doing each day. So like humor or music or like meditation, just different things, the healthy things, vitamins. I put it together so it fit the letters. I know, and I did all kinds of. I did a whole campaign for that, in other words, to get people to improve their immune system. That is the best thing that you could do to not get COVID, not get the vaccine, just make yourself healthier. And if you did all of these things, social support, hobbies, doing something to, get yourself interested in other things, just, all kind. I mean, it was a whole big, I don't have it in front of me right now. And it was a few years ago, but I believed in it tremendously. And so I that was my sort of counter Fauci thing to do. I felt sort of compelled, ethically compelled to try to help people the right way.
well, it's kind of interesting when you look at immigration. For 4 years, we watched total disarray. Nothing was done. Promises were made. And I think psychologically, not only psychologically, but practicality, the one party that was in favor of open borders, the Democrats in this case, basically saw these people as potential voters.
Mm-hmm.
And it was all about getting more people on the voter rolls and providing the dole for them, basically a payoff for getting them to vote. And it's amazing. I'm absolutely amazed that in
Yes.
such a short period of time, we have the lowest amount of border violations that we've had in years. And so people have taken the gloves off and they're saying, forget about the political issues. This is our country. We have rules, we have regulations. You have to follow them if you want to get it to become a part of our nation. So, what do you think about the effect of the immigration legislation?
Well, I think I think that this and it wasn't just, I mean, it was horrible that so many people came across for so many reasons. I mean, the health reasons, measles, for example, tuberculosis, all kinds of diseases that America hasn't had for years, decades, and now they're coming across. Terrorists. I was warning people for a long time about how terrorists were coming across, terrorists on the terrorist watch list even. And of course, the voting issue. And even worse, or at least as bad as the fact that they were all coming across and bringing out of the violence and the crime and all of that. But equally bad was the fact that they kept lying to us about saying, oh, nobody's coming across. It's not any more than it used to be. Or, I mean, all these things when they were it was bald-faced lies. And of course, Kamala didn't do anything because that was her job, to not do anything for the border.
Or probably anything else either.
Right.
It's kind of it. I noticed last night that you see Vance involved in all of these discussions, the one at the White House, even with Zelensky.
Mm-hmm.
And yet, for the 4 years that Biden administration was in charge, you never saw her.
Right.
And it's just kind of an observation. I guess I look at all of the little things.
Yes. No. Well, it was really Obama who was ruling Biden. He was directing everything. They didn't need Kamala. Obama was the puppeteer, and Biden was just doing what he told him because Biden couldn't figure these things out for himself. And when Biden surrendered in Afghanistan, that is, I mean, I think people are finally sort of acknowledging just how disastrous that was. But that is such going to be if there are schools and kids and history books in the future, that will be one of the things, one of the times, the points in time that are going to be talked about as being a really crucial time, a big time of change, because it was after that, showing America was so weak to the whole world. It was after that Putin invaded Ukraine, and China started acting up, and North Korea, everybody, all our enemies started being enabled because they saw, oh, look, America is surrendering.
I would ask you just a couple of specifics, and then we're going to conclude with the prognosis. And
Sure.
I'm putting you on the spot for that. Obviously, there's a lot of things that are happening in the Middle East and elsewhere. The court system is still very viable. We don't know where that's going to go. But the reality is we are making change. So, bottom line, as they say, what's your prognosis?
A good prognosis. I think these things will gradually be worked out. I think it is hard for some people, especially not just because it's Trump, but because a lot of people don't do well with change. Even if it's good change. So it is a little much for some people. I mean, not necessarily the Democrats who are actively working against him, but just people in the middle who, on the one hand, are happy that some of these things are happening, but also a little discombobulated, like, oh my goodness, all these things are happening at the same time. And but it will die down. Everyone will get adjusted, and I think in 4 years, this country is going to be on top of the world.
Okay.
It's as it was supposed to be, as it was allegedly before.
No,
but
that's good.
In the last 4 years, it sunk, and then it'll be on top of the world again.
Well, no, it's easy to be a pessimist, because you're looking at what's happening right now, and it's not past, present, and future. The only thing that really matters is now, and we're seeing change. And I always used to say it takes a great deal of strength to overcome the anxiety of change.
Right.
And that's what's going on. So anyway, I want to mention that next week we're going to have as guests Alan Dershowitz, David Schoen, who was Trump's lawyer in the impeachment, and we're following up the following week with Roger Stone. So we have some interesting guests coming up, and we're also going to update what's going on with the fire situation, the effect it's having on people in general. And I want to conclude by thanking you for being a guest, and I learned a lot from you. And it takes more people like you to make a difference. And I personally encourage you to keep on doing it, because there will be a positive result at the very end of this. So again, thank you very much, Carole. Appreciate it. I hope you'll come back after we see what's going on for a little bit and see how accurate you were.
Absolutely. Thank you. It was my pleasure.
Thanks. Bye-bye now.
Bye-bye.